Hey there, friends. I want to continue the discussion we've been having on educational Sloyd. And just want to keep in mind that educational Sloyd is not about teaching woodworking, even though woodworking is the tool that we use. Um, Educational Sloyd is about training the whole child, helping a child develop their mind through the use of their hands. So, in the first video, we talked about the principles of Sloyd, and those are things like focusing on one craft at a time. Uh, any craft really could be used for Sloyd, but we want to focus on just one craft and focus on it being a teaching and training of the whole child rather than the teaching of a trade. In the last video, we talked about the aims of Sloyd, which are things like instilling a love and respect for labor, uh, helping a child develop patience and perseverance, and exactness of work. We're not going to cover all those again, but there will be a link at the end if you're interested in seeing the first two videos. So next we want to turn our attention to the methods of Sloyd. And there are 9 elements of the methods of Sloyd, and these serve as the kind of guiding rules for how to teach Sloyd. But before we get into the 9, I want to talk a little bit about the structure of Sloyd and how that's used. So Otto Salomon did not develop the theory of Sloyd. In fact, it evolved over time, and it actually grew out of the concept of kindergarten. Whereas Froebel decided or learned that a child who plays is more likely to learn. So we need to encourage the children during their playtime and during their exploration, if you will. And that's how the whole concept of kindergarten came about. Then they took it a step further. Some of Salomon's predecessors developed this whole idea that we needed to help the children reconnect and start using their hands. But Salomon is the one that kind of standardized it, wrote it down so that others could learn from that. And what he developed is a series of 88, what we would call skills. He called them exercises, but they are 88 exercises that are needed to execute educational Sloyd. And these range from very simple to very difficult woodworking techniques. So the simple being the use of a knife and simple cuts, all the way up to mortise and tenoning, dovetailing, and some of the more complicated joinery that we see. In addition to that, he developed a series of what he called models. So there were 50 models. We would call them, in today's language, we'd probably call them projects. So there are 50 projects that the child is expected to complete. And they, again, range from very simple to very complex. Simple being a pointer, basically a stick that can be whittled down into a pointer, all the way up to a table. Now, also keep in mind that when we're talking about Sloyd and the use of these hand tools, we're not talking about older children. This was really aimed at elementary aged kids. Now, there was a series for high school as well, which was a little bit more difficult, but the target age range of the children is about 3rd grade. So we're talking about 8, 9, 10 in that age range. So the models really are developed for kids of that age. But the most complex of these models is a full table. And so they're expecting kids in this age range to be able to produce a full table. So as we talk, and we're going to talk later about in more detail about what these exercises are and what these models are, but they do go from very simple to very complex, easy to difficult. And that comes out actually in the methods of Sloyd. Now, I am referencing my notes here because, quite frankly, I can't remember all that we need to talk about. So let's get into the 9 methods of Sloyd, or the guiding principles. Number 1, the instruction must go from easy to difficult. Now, this refers specifically to the progression of the skills that we were referencing just a few minutes ago. This is where we go from a very easy knife cut, a long cut on a stick, to the very complicated mortise tenon, dovetailing, stopped grooves, all of that kind of stuff. So we go from very simple to very difficult skills. Method number 2 is that we go from simple to complex. Now, in this case, we're referring to the projects or the models. So we go from a simple pointer to a table and everything in between. Method number 3 is to go from the known to the unknown. So part of what he did is develop these models. So he actually produced the models. He would show the models to the children, and then he would expect the children to be able to reproduce, to the best of their ability, those models. And eventually we go from being able to just copy a model to adding your own design elements. That way we go from the known to the unknown, and we're triggering the child's imagination and creativity as they are starting to now develop their own style or aesthetic. Number 4, the teaching must lay a foundation. Primarily what we're referring to here is there has to be a logical progression. You cannot start out by having a 3rd grader build a table. We need to be able to go from model to model, and these skills build on themselves, and the models then progress. So as a child completes the first one, the first skill, first model, they should be ready to take on the next model and learn the new skills that go along with that. So it is foundational. We go from model to model in a very logical step. Okay. Method number 5, the teacher should possess educational tact. If you refer back to the guiding principles, Sloyd is supposed to be individual in nature, meaning that the children are going to progress at different rates. Some will go very fast, some might go a little slower. Some are going to produce excellent results, whereas some maybe not quite so good. And if you remember, this is not about teaching a child the craft. This is about teaching the child to do their best, to work towards excellence. But when a teacher has educational tact, they're going to be aware of the fact that we have pushed the child as far as they can go on that particular model, and asking them to reproduce the model is probably not going to generate any new success. Now, I do want to stop here for a second. Models are to be rebuilt or retried as often as is needed for the child to feel comfortable and confident. But with educational tact, we do understand that at some point we reach the point of diminishing returns. There's no point in just doing needless exercises. So the teacher must have, 1, wisdom to know when the child has reached the limit for that particular model and should move on. They also need to have experience so that the class will progress at different levels, and they need to be able to deal with that. Okay. Number 6, the teaching should be interesting. One of the things that Salomon really stressed is that the models that a child builds should be of interest to the child. And it should be, 1, something the child can use, or 2, something that the child can give away and will be used in their household. So the models he developed back in the 1890s were aimed at the children, keeping the interest of the children, and they were items that could be used in their home. So as we're thinking through our models, we're probably going to have to update them because there's some items in there. I don't even know what the term means. There's a term, one called a diddle. I don't know what a diddle is. Something that would have been interesting to a child back then, but has no meaning to a child now. So Salomon was very clear that the models that he used were for children in his area, but that in other areas or now in other times, we're going to need new models. So we need to develop models that are going to be interesting to the child. Number 7, instruction should be intuitive and based on the senses. If you've never watched Paul Sellers, I would highly recommend that you check out some of his videos. He is an excellent teacher when it comes to using hand tools. But one of the things that he always teaches is that you need to be in tune with the wood, particularly sound. As you're doing cutting or planing or something like that, you need to listen to how the tool reacts to the work in addition to feeling. And by engaging all of the senses, you actually become a better woodworker. And Salomon had the same idea back in the 1890s, is that you need to use all of the senses when doing the woodworking. All right. Principle or method number 8, teaching should be individual. Even though this may happen in a class environment, that there has to be individual instruction. Now, this does not go to the point of the teacher actually touching the child's models. Salomon was very clear about that. Teachers are to keep their hands off of the child's model, absolutely to the maximum extent they could. But the teaching has to be individual. You have to give individual attention to the children and make sure that they are progressing at the pace that is comfortable for the child, not the pace that is comfortable for the whole class. Again, we're going to start seeing a divergence here, with some moving faster than others. Keep it individual. Okay? Method number 9, and this is one that we talked about in the guiding principles, and Salomon thought it important enough to repeat it here, that the teacher or the instructor must be more versed in the ability to teach than their ability as a craftsperson or artisan. You're going to have the basic skills, but you do not have to be an accomplished tradesperson or artisan to be able to teach children. Again, it's about helping the children learn, not necessarily teaching them to go into the trades. So he thought it was very important that your ability as a teacher is far more important to your ability as a craftsperson. And possibly one of the reasons I like this so much is, I'm a fairly decent teacher, especially when it comes to teaching children. I've always enjoyed that. And I would rate my skill as a craftsperson pretty low. I've just not devoted enough time to be really good at it. So, but I am a pretty good teacher. So this really resonates with me, and I find this pretty intriguing here. All right. So that brings us to the end of this discussion on the methods of Sloyd. I tell you, I have learned a lot reading the works of Solomon and some others on teaching children, educating children through the methods of Sloyd. I find that very interesting. Hopefully, you've been able to get something out of these talks. If so, do me a favor, drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think. And again, if you disagree with anything, we can have a conversation about that. There's certainly one of the interesting things is having differences of opinions and the ability to talk through issues. So that's it for today. Next up, we are going to do a video on the tools of Sloyd, and I'll actually pull tools out of my collection and see how they line up with what Otto Solomon had in his book. So until then, take care. God bless.